Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Real World Productivity Podcast. The title of today's interview is Building the Productive Future, Jordan Baker and Focuster. I'm Adam Moody, and today I'm obviously talking with productivity expert Jordan Baker about the tips, methods, and his background leading up to his powerful productivity app, Focuster. So first off, welcome, Jordan.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to jump right in. A little background for everybody on this. Jordan was nice enough to come back after we had some technical issues. And so this is the part 2 of this, or rather the redo. So we're going to get into it. And I wanted to make sure that I have a chance to share some of Jordan's background and what he's up to with everyone. So Jordan, my first set of questions is about your background and experience in the field of productivity, and just a little bit about you so that people in the audience can understand who you are, where you're coming from, and how they can relate to where they are. So we'll just kind of do that and jump in. And I want to talk about Focuster since it's something I share with my audience. And so if you don't mind, can you just start off with telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I have been working as a self-employed person and an entrepreneur for the last 20 years. First, I started out as a contractor, and in the last couple of years, I started a web development agency. And in the most recent years, I founded a software as a service startup in the area of productivity. So that's a long way of saying that I'm very familiar with the challenges of really driving yourself forward, because when you have a job, when you work for somebody else, typically, and this is not always the case, but typically, you are kind of handed if it's a good boss, right? Typically you're handed a series of objectives. And as long as you're meeting those objectives, you know that you're doing a good job. When you're self-employed or when you're running your own company, you are the one who is actually in charge of setting those things up. And that, I think, has, leads to unique challenges when it comes to your personal productivity.
Definitely. Actually, I totally agree with you. I talked about that a little bit recently, and that was also for myself a big change. Since I haven't been an entrepreneur or on my own for 20 years, but within the last 6 years transitioning out and realizing there's nobody looking over my shoulder. I'm looking over my shoulder. Well, then in terms of a little bit about your background in terms of productivity, did you have any sort of training? Did you go to university and have some sort of courses, or did you find yourself reading books? Like, what led you to this point where eventually you said, hey, I need to take things up a notch, and what was that?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, yeah, my situation is a little unique in that I, from an early age, demonstrated, a lot of aptitude in computers, and I was pretty resistant. I was kind of anti-authoritarian in school. I ended up actually not finishing my high school, and I went right into the workforce. I actually ended up running an ISP within a year of that.
Oh, wow.
I was promoted from being tech support to actually running the ISP. I helped 10x the growth of that particular ISP. And then I guess about a year after I left that job, I was there for like 2 years. Then I was running the website for one of Canada's largest newspapers. Granted, I was very lucky to be working in the industry at a time where things were exploding. This was, during the early part of the .com boom, and things were really heating up. There wasn't a lot of people who had experience necessarily with all of these technologies. There was such a huge demand, and because of that, I was able to get, on the job, on the, real experience. I mean, I had already been hacking things on my own as a, when I say hacking, I don't mean illegally exploiting computers necessarily, but what I meant by that is kind of, I had my own personal projects. I was, creating online games and, programming in the C programming language when I was like 13 years old. And so I was into, using Unix and all this, stuff that is taught in universities. Like, I was messing around with all that type of stuff from a very early age. And, so for me, I was always really feeling like if I needed to learn something, I could teach myself. when I needed to learn a new programming language, I got a book. I just picked a project I had to do. I would just apply myself to it, and boom, I would learn what I need to know. And this has really been one of the key, I think for me, one of the key skills to have is like this is not even a skill. It's like an attitude of like, I can learn what I need to know. Of course I can get help, but there's knowledge out there, there's resources, and just because I don't know something doesn't mean that that's going to hold me back. Okay, so to come back to your question about like productivity though,
Yeah.
I realized that there was this real I think because I was kind of anti-authoritarian, I actually had a kind of a more impulsive work ethic. And I think personally, I think I still do to some degree. So what was necessary for me was to find a productivity, a way to be productive that kind of matched the way that I worked, because I've actually found that being spontaneous, following my natural curiosity, and being in the moment with things has actually brought me a lot of success. So there's a balance between trying to be super rigid about kind of planning out every single moment that you have in your day, and being able to respond to things. So that it really actually relates directly to how I plan my day now. So some of the people that I studied along the way were people like, I read the Seven Habits book, and Stephen Covey, planning, putting the big rocks first. I don't know if you remember that book.
Uh-huh.
And that was a game changer for me because, really prior to that point, I had this huge master list of everything I needed to do, and it was kind of more organized by project. But the Seven Habits approach was to really think about the different roles in my life, and to think about not just what do I need to get done, but what can I do to improve my capacity to get things done? What do you call sharpening the saw? So it's like, how can I invest now in doing something that will make things easier in the future, which is in some ways, very similar to this whole one thing idea, one thing question. So, and then after that, I mean, I was, so one of the things he really emphasized was like planning, putting the big rocks in your calendar, right? Putting the big rocks in your schedule first, so that all the little tiny things, the little pebbles, right? Of, can you do this, please? And, your client asks you to do that. And all those little things, little pebbles fit in around the big rocks. So the big things that are going to move you forward in a huge way, right? The quadrant one, the urgent, the not urgent but important things, the things that usually get skipped. You want to schedule those things in your calendar to make sure they're going to get done, and everything else is going to fit in around it, no problem. But if you try to do it the other way, you'll never fit those big rocks in the jar. That's his metaphor. So
well, I'm kind of curious then about, but if you don't mind, when you were talking about planning versus spontaneous, which I find really interesting, and I totally agree. Like if you plan, for me, I feel the same way. I try to plan out a lot of my time, but if I don't leave time, then I end up feeling kind of spent. I don't have any really creative time. I don't have time to just think through, or ideas just don't come to me, and that I think is fairly normal. In terms of how you actually use Focuster, for example, like how do you use the app in that way? Do you block out time? And I mean, this is just a kind of a use case scenario. I was really curious about that.
Yeah, so I mean, just to kind of before we maybe talk about how I use Focuster, so you're just bringing up the app. So Focuster is this productivity app that I've created, which allows you to schedule your to-do list basically into your calendar. It allows you to create an optimized schedule for what you need to do, as you know, and just want to give some background to the listeners here. So basically, the way that one typically uses Focuster is just to you dump the things that you want to do into your list, and then for each of those items on the list, Focuster looks at your calendar, it talks to your Google Calendar, Outlook, iCloud, whatever you got, and it slots in those things you need to do into your calendar, so that you can make sure that you have enough time for the things you need to do, And then you can make little adjustments and whatnot. So the way that I'm actually using it now, I'm actually using, we have a new beta feature that's coming online, which is related to time blocking. So with this ability now, I can actually have multiple lists of things. So I tend to break up some of the, some of the more creative parts of my day, because, in the morning, I tend to kind of be a little bit higher energy, a little bit more creative. And the afternoon, sometimes I, get a little bit tired. So I kind of work with my own energy levels. So what I've done in my schedule is I've blocked off time in my mornings for the more kind of deep work style of things. Whether that's designing new features on the app, or sometimes it's content creation. And so I've made a list of those activities. I've created a block, a repeating block in my calendar to, and then Focuster knows to schedule my deep work activities during those times.
Nice. Yeah, sorry, kind of throwing you a live curveball there. I thought that was really interesting, and I've talked a lot about Focuster, so I was curious. I think people would want to know how you do that. I think that's really helpful for people. But to kind of get back onto track, with obviously a programming background, do you think that with all that you had to do, you described, how you had a lot to do, how you helped grow the ISP, all those things you've kind of learned on your own. Do you think that background has helped you in terms of organization or productivity? Or, I mean, I would assume so, but I find sometimes that, just assuming something doesn't necessarily make it true.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a progression, because as I said, at first I was very spontaneous. I didn't really have a ton of systems. So finding 7 Habits was a big step forward for me. An even bigger step, I think, was finding Getting Things Done. Getting Things Done, the book, was like a revelation in some ways, because I was like, wow, this is such a cool system, and everything kind of makes sense. There's a place for everything, and there's a place for the idea of next actions, and really just focusing only on the next thing I need to do is just such a great concept. You can apply that in pretty much any productivity tool you want. So that really kind of helped me to see the benefit of having systems. And bring it back to the question that you asked, Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just kind of bring me back?
Oh, yeah, no problem. Yeah, just with as far as programming, kind of in that context, do you think that it helped you with organization or productivity? And then basically the follow-on would be kind of, if so, how? I was just curious. I've done some scripting. I do very basic things. But do you think that there's anything in there, kind of a bigger question, do you think it's helpful for people in terms of organization, or maybe not so much productivity, but the way of thinking? Because there's a lot of, from the outside, I consider myself looking in, and I see that some people who do a lot of programming or coding have certain ways of looking at things that can sometimes be helpful. Do you think that's true, or not so much?
The thing with programming is that, there's different types of programming, I would say. Mm-hmm. A lot of programming requires really deep work. That's why, and I don't know if you've ever worked with a developer before, that's why they sometimes get really frustrated if you're interrupting them, right? Because they'll be in the middle of debugging a really complicated piece of code, and it's like, they're holding all these different variables in their heads. I'll speak to myself. I'll be holding all these different variables in my head, and then someone will ask me a question, and it'll pull me out of that, and I'll be like, where was I again? And the other thing I find that's kind of challenging around productivity and development is, one would like to schedule something and say, okay, I'm going to do this. It's going to take 2 hours. But I find with programming, a lot of times, a thing that I might estimate at 2 hours, when I start digging into it, ends up taking 8, 16. Sure. And sometimes it's just like, okay, I got to just get this done however long it takes. So that's one of the challenges I find with productivity, most traditional productivity systems and software development, is that, you make this plan, and at some point things go wrong. It's not your fault. Like, it's, sometime, you dig into it, it's the third-party software vendor has messed something up, and now you got to deal with it. But the challenge is how do you juggle all your other commitments? So that's where I actually really advocate prioritizing what you need to do and letting your priorities really drive This is very much in the philosophy of the Focuster app, because you're really, the main thing you want to do is establish what are your priorities. You definitely are also estimating how much time those things are going to take. But let's just put it this way: if you get the if you get wrong, if you get the estimates of how long things are going to take wrong, that's not as bad as as getting the priorities wrong, right? I'd much rather be working on the right thing, right, and maybe being wrong about how long it's going to take, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely, getting that feedback is what's going to help you improve anyway. So if you're never attempting that in the first place, then you'll never get that.
So it really boils down to this question: like, if you were going to get one thing done today, right? What would that one, if you could do one thing today that's really going to move things forward in a significant way, what's that going to be? Or, maybe it's, what are the 3 things you can get done today that will really move things forward in a significant way? And even if you only got one of those things done, if that was your highest priority thing that you could think of that would move things forward, you might actually feel pretty happy with your progress. I mean, you'll probably deal with a bunch of other things too, like little emails and phone calls and texts and
Sure.
filling out forms and banking crap. But, at the end of the day, if you got that one critical thing done, you'd be pretty happy. So it's really about getting really clear about what those priorities are, putting it in a system that's going to relentlessly remind you to actually get that done. And that's really the philosophy behind the app that I created, Focuster.
Nice. Well, yeah, and we've obviously talked a little bit or touched on it briefly and what Focuster is. Can you describe kind of what's the best ways for someone to integrate into their workflow? That is how to integrate Focuster. Let's say somebody's like, neat, I kind of want to check out this app. I've heard Adam talk about it. I listened to the podcast with Jordan. How do you see Focuster fitting into someone's workflow or planning, or just how would you describe someone using it?
Yeah, well, there's lots of different ways you can integrate it. I mean, some people use it as their only tool. Some people have a very complicated workflow. Maybe they have existing project management software. So you can either use it standalone or you can integrate it with what you have. But the idea that I like to promote around Focuster is using it as a digital, as a hub for all of the actionable things in your life. Because when you pull things from all the different projects you have, like, you might have Trello boards where you have responsibilities, you might have follow-ups in your CRM software, you may have emails that require you to respond, and each of those things is going to take a certain amount of time, and each of those things really should be prioritized, relative to other things. Some of them, some of those things you may want to deal with separately, but if you do want to prioritize all of them, if you bring them into Focuster as your digital action dashboard, if you want to call it that, then you can actually prioritize all of those different things, and you can schedule all those things to get done. So that, that for me is a pretty good high level view of how to do that. And then, we support connecting to over 1,000 different applications using Zapier. So you can pull data in from, as I said, like a CRM system, email systems, other productivity tools, and link them together. And increasingly, we're actually now moving towards doing some native integrations, which give you, a kind of a predefined workflow that's real time, that also gives you kind of a two-way syncing capability, which is going to make things even easier for people.
Nice. Well, I guess that kind of leads into, actually, I was going to ask you next, like, what's in the future for Focuster? Like, if there's any stuff you can tantalize us with, or or is there any kind of big picture stuff of what's going on with it?
Well, I mean, the focus of the last couple months, and what we're gearing up to launch right now, we've had in beta for some time, but is the multiple calendar integrations. So up to this point, we've supported just Google Calendar, and we've heard from a lot of business customers that they want to be able to connect to their Microsoft Outlook application, whether it's hosted in Office 365 or Microsoft Exchange, and also Apple iCloud. And we not only support all of those, but we support multiple, as many calendar connections as you need. If you've got a complicated business and life and all that, we've got you covered. the other thing that we've been introducing is, a recurring actions capability into the app. So if you have something you need to do every, Monday, or, every day or every week or whatever. And this is better than, it's better and different than kind of putting a recurring event in your calendar, because if you put a recurring event in your calendar, it'll remind you once and then it'll just kind of slip through the cracks.
Mhm.
With Focuster, one of the core benefits is that, you put it in your day, and it'll roll forward into the next day if you don't finish it, and it'll keep reminding you as well when it's at the top of your stack. It'll keep reminding you when you have free time to work on it. So recurring actions in the app, if it's like, if you have to file a report every week, it'll make sure it really gets it done, and keeps it top of mind, rather than just having an event in your calendar that could kind of slip through the cracks. Some of the other features, really the one that I'm super excited about, which we're just doing some early testing on this, but it's this time blocking idea, which is the ability to to kind of break down the different areas of your work. You can break it down by role. You can break it down by kind of area of interest. So for an example of a time blocking example would be, somebody who has a home list and somebody who has a work list. So you might want to work, let's say, your wife asks you to put together a swing set. You wouldn't necessarily want to schedule that during your busy work week, but you don't really want to think about it too much. So you throw it on your home list, and then you create a home block to work on your home projects on the weekend. And so automatically Focuster would then find the next available time in your home block. If for some reason something came up, you didn't finish it, it would move it to the next available home block, like the next weekend, for example, so that again, whenever you open your calendar, and whenever you have free time, you get a notification saying, hey, it's time to work on that swing set. And also, if your wife asks you, hey, Adam, when are you going to do that swing set? You can look on your home list and you can see, when you have that plan for. If she says, well, I also want you to do this, and you could say, well, when would you like, if you could say, do you want me to do that first? Do you want me to do that after? If you do it first, you can see in real time, Focuster will show you like, oh, that's actually going to push it off to next weekend. Is that okay with you, or would you rather me do that other thing first? And now you can have a conversation. So that's another really cool advantage of using an app like Focuster, is it lets you see in real time what the consequences are of changing the priorities, right?
Yeah, that is awesome. Actually, I wholeheartedly cast my vote for that. That would be great. As somebody who works on several businesses, it'd be nice to do that, because I already kind of do that with my calendar, where I try to block out certain days so that I can spend at least 2 to 3 hours working on one specific project in one area, and then scheduling things that way. That sounds awesome.
Yep. Just the beginning.
All right. Well, I got one more question for you, Jordan. I'm curious, what is maybe 1 or 2 books that you find yourself recommending to people? It can be any topic, any genre. It doesn't have to be productivity, or it can be. But what books do you find yourself recommending to people the most?
Books that I find myself recommending. Okay. Well, I don't know. I should open up my Kindle and see what I've what I've been reading recently. I've been reading Jordan Peterson's book, The 12 Rules for Living, which I really find awesome. I also just bought a book. I haven't read it yet, but it's Benjamin Hardy's book, Willpower Doesn't Work. It's definitely kind of along the lines of the things that we talk about. Another book, I mean, the Stealing Fire book actually is a really great book if you haven't read that. It's a book all about flow states. So it's kind of a study of, in a way, it's a kind of, it's a scientific look at humanity's kind of desire for altered states of mind, and how that affects our productivity, how that affects our life. It's a really, really fascinating book, which covers the gamut from how the Navy SEALs use different breathing techniques to kind of get in the zone, to surfers who surf these 50-foot waves, to entheogens and Burning Man, to to corporate mindfulness meditation programs, all that type of stuff. It's a really cool book.
Awesome.
Yeah, those are just a couple ones that have
That's
been on my
good. Now, I
reading list.
like asking this because now I've already got a backlog, but I got more books to read. I actually haven't read any of those, so I'm gonna go check those out and recommend
I got
people
one.
check
I
those
got
out.
one last one that I can super recommend to you, which is "The Obstacle Is the Way" by Ryan Holiday. Have you read that one?
I think I read like the abridged notes or something. I've
Oh,
definitely
okay.
like speed read through it, but I might have to go back.
Yeah, I highly recommend that one too.
Nice. Outstanding. Well, Jordan, thank you very much again for coming back and making the time to do this. I really appreciate you doing this. If people want to find out more about you, about Focuster, like where's the best place for them to go?
Pretty easy. It's www.focuster.com, Focuster.com. Oh,
Outstanding. Thank you.
thanks again.
I'd like to invite you to check out www.productivity.academy today for more information on how you can better manage your time, become more productive, and just get more effective doing the things that you want to do and achieving the goals that you want. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next podcast.